BBC HBO adaptation of Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials is a Portal Quest fantasy with multiple parallel worlds accessed through openings found or created. Will Parry is the secondary protagonist, first seen in episode 5, season 1. He lives in our world, in Britain. In Pullman's book, The Subtle Knife, Will exists on a backdrop of the ordinary, constructed through markers of working classness. The close where Will and his mother lived was a loop of road in a modern estate with a dozen identical houses, of which theirs was by far the shabbiest. Pullman's imagery jars with the aesthetics of the series, in which Will and his mother live in a designer, Scandinavian-inspired mid-century home. This house was, in actuality, designed by Thomas Glyn Jones and John R. Evans in the 1960s.
What a pleasant room.
What are the consequences of this change? This city suburb retains the muted, painterly colour palette of the main protagonist Lyra's Oxford. Like in the location shots of a period drama, the graffiti, takeaways, traffic and advertising of modern-day Britain are cropped out of view. What is unseen forms the underbelly of this polished and subdued aesthetic. Disgust exists just off screen, at the alternate, literary incarnation of Will, whose home doesn't line up with bourgeois tastes. The bourgeois individual is shaped by their distance from and disgust at the masses and mass culture. How can they derive symbolic value from a house which is identical to a dozen others? The tastefully designed and decorated Parry house sits alone. In the Harry Potter films, we see a marked example of identical houses on Privet Drive. Harry resides very uncomfortably in this tasteless suburb before he is able to pass through his portal. The cruelty he is subjected to seems to go hand in hand with the excess and pretense of the Dursley family, desperately trying but inevitably failing to suppress the intrusion of the uncanny, or the unhomely, into their tightly regulated, hypernormative existence. The muggles of Privet Drive are trying too hard to play the game of bourgeois taste, and this act of inauthenticity has grave implications for their moral standing. Stephanie Lawler cites Bourdieu when she points out that pretensions provoke calls to order. Who does she think she is? The home can reflect the interior life, but in Harry Potter, the disgust for this home and its inhabitants is visible on screen and juxtaposed against other, more fitting dwellings. Harry resides in this place for many years, all the while retaining his own innate moral and aesthetic competencies. He is forever at odds with the aesthetics of the space and its inhabitants. The experience of the spectator is one of aesthetic distance. Will's house is conversely a display of visual coherence, its markers of good taste so precisely chosen according to middle-class cultural capital as to transcend the material. Will is not at odds with his home or its other inhabitants, but this space is contradictory, melancholy and unsettled, its borders intruded on, rendering it unsafe.
Extraordinary people like your dad, like you.
Both Harry and Will are explicitly destined to escape this real world and cross into the fantastic. Inevitably, what they escape is any remnants of working class life or the distasteful. What grants these characters the mobility to develop and escape is their coding as middle class, their cultural competence, their innate affinity with legitimate middle-class taste, or their distance from the tasteless. And judgments of taste ultimately stand in for moral judgments.